Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Dan Rodney and welcome to Noble Desktop's live stream for how to get started in graphic design. For myself, I have been a designer for over 20 years and I am an instructor and course developer at Noble Desktop. And tonight we're going to be talking about what graphic designers do, the kind of software they use, and how to get started in graphic design. At Noble Desktop, we've been teaching design and code for the past 30 years. And so this is kind of our specialty is the design and code. And this presentation that I have here, these are some slides. For those of you who are watching this live, I'm pasting that link into the chat so you can have that link, and there's a bunch of useful information in here, slides that we're going to be going through, so you can keep that URL handy. And for any of you watching this as a recording, because we are recording tonight's session, we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel. If you are watching the recording, check out the video description down below the video, and you should be able to find the link to these slides. So you can click through the links and have this information for you. As far as using these slides, you can use the arrow buttons down here at the bottom right, or you can use your arrow keys. The left and right arrow key goes back and forth between the slides. And if you are on a touchscreen device, you can also swipe between the slides as well. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We are going to talk about what exactly graphic design is, what designers do, showing examples of the type of work that you would do as a graphic designer. We'll talk about the various apps that graphic designers use, depending on the area that you're getting into, and if there's any sort of special computer or anything, things that you need to think about if you are getting into design, any computer requirements, and ultimately developing a portfolio of your work. As a designer, your most important thing to show that you can do good design is your portfolio. When I get a resume from somebody, the most important thing on that resume, to be honest, is just the link to their website. The first thing I want to do is go to their website, take a look at their work, take a look at their portfolio, and if that's not good, then it doesn't even really matter what's on the resume, because they can have worked for impressive companies, but if the work isn't good on their portfolio, then ultimately they're showing that their work is not very good. On the other hand, if I see somebody who maybe they don't have an impressive resume yet. Maybe they're a young designer, but they have amazing work on their portfolio. They've shown that they can do amazing work. So really your portfolio is one of the most important things when you're especially when you're first getting started as a designer, to show that you can do this work. So we'll take a look at some example portfolios, and we'll talk about things you can do when you're developing your portfolio. So let's go ahead and get started here. So how is it that you go about getting started if you want to become a graphic designer? Well, first of all, there's different types of design that you could be getting into. Web design, app design, print design, all different types of design, motion design. So you got to figure out what kind of design you're most interested in. Tonight we'll be talking about a variety of different types of design and going through some examples. Depending on the kind of design that you're interested in, there'll be certain apps that you're going to need to learn that you'll be doing design with. Most of them are typically Adobe apps, but that's not the only kind of apps. We'll go through for each kind of design which apps you need to be designing with. Now, the apps are just a tool. If I give you a hammer and a saw, that doesn't make you a carpenter. It doesn't make you be able to build houses or whatever it is you want to build, furniture. So just by learning a design app doesn't make you a designer. There's also the design concepts. What makes design good? Typography, color, composition. If you're doing interactive media, so web design, app design, there's user interaction. There can be animation in digital products. Obviously not in print products, but in digital products, which we design a lot, there can be animation. So there's lots of good, what is good design? Like what makes something attractive? What makes it easy to use? If it's a digital product, what makes it a good design? So there's being able to execute it using the apps. Of course, that's important, that you can kind of come up with a vision and actually execute that vision and build it and design it on the computer, but it's also important to do good design. So what makes that design good? Once you know the apps, you need to practice them to become good. Same thing with design concepts. You can hear what makes good design, but that doesn't mean that you can come up with it. Just because you can see what you know is a good design, like, oh, that's an amazing logo. Just because you can recognize it doesn't mean that you can build it yourself, that you can design it yourself. So it's important to practice and just over and over again, just be designing a lot, be using the software a lot so you can become faster with the software, better with the software. Keep designing multiple things. If you want to get into logo design, for example, design many logos. The first ones you build are not going to be as good as the ones that you later build. So you're going to want to keep practicing these things to get good at it. It takes time to become good and to be the best designer you can be. And but you got to get started somewhere. And so it's okay to get started and just practice as much as you can. And as you're doing these practice, as you're learning the software, as you're practicing these design concepts, coming up with projects, the hope is that you're going to have some good work as you're doing that. And so you're going to want to start to build a portfolio. And it'll be a portfolio website, and that will show what you are capable of. And as you continue working and continue to do projects, whether they are fictional projects that you're coming up with just to learn on, or eventually you start to get client work, maybe you're working at a job, you start to get other projects, and hopefully those are better than the ones you did in the beginning, and you'll update your portfolio, and your portfolio will grow as you grow and become a better and better designer. So what exactly is graphic design? Graphic design is very broad. It's any sort of visual communication that uses artwork, imagery, text, but it's about visual communication. For example, like I would not call a painting typically a graphic design. A graphic design typically has a goal of something it wants to do. It wants to communicate something. So it can be conveying information. It can be like a book. It can be a magazine. It could be signage. It could be a logo. It could be packaging design. What's the package that something comes in? The product design itself could be considered a form of graphic design. Videos have text, they have imagery, they have videos. There's a graphic design component to videography to some extent. Now, maybe if you're doing a film, maybe the videos themselves, you might not think of those as graphic design, but there's going to be graphic design elements, things like the titling that's been done in the movie or the TV show or the online video, the graphics that go into those videos, those have to be designed. So really broad topic that you can say I'm a graphic designer, and it doesn't really tell somebody exactly what kind of design you do. So you could be designing logos, advertisements, social media is big these days, books, magazine, websites, apps, all sorts of things. There's lots of different mediums that you can work in. So there's printed mediums, there's digital like websites, video, all different areas of design that you can work in. Presentations is also, so print, web, presentations, that might be an area that people don't think of, is that you have to design a presentation. Lots of businesses are driven off of ideas that need to be presented to somebody, and somebody needs to design those presentations, so that's another medium. Now, graphic design's been around for a long time. And so for some people, when you say I'm a graphic designer, they may assume that you're doing one of the older styles of design, such as print. Typically, people that are doing digital design will give themselves a different title. So they might not say I'm a graphic designer. They might say I'm a web designer. I'm a UX or UI designer. I'm an app designer. Or they might just say in general I'm a visual designer. Visual design is kind of the new graphic design title, but it typically implies, like if somebody says I'm a visual designer, that's typically a digital designer for the most part. So if technically all these things are graphic design. You're not wrong to say that a web designer is a graphic designer. It is a form of graphics, but they typically wouldn't call themselves a graphic designer. They would kind of give their specialty kind of thing. So lots of different titles fall under the realm of graphic design. So different examples here. For example, here's a logo design. And a lot of these things I will link out to the person's website so you can see more examples of this work. And so you can click on here and see some examples. So Ignacio here has amazing logo designs. When you look at his designs, you're just like, man, he really boiled this down to just the essence of what this brand can be. So like Nutriversity, it's such a brilliant thing of using forks for the columns, and so it feels stately and feels authority, like it has authority, but yet has the fork concept there. So very clean, iconic, very smart, and great design. While you can go through here and go on to the next one, you can also go back and look at all the logos. So let's go back and look at all these. Another favorite of mine here is debugging. This is just, I think, a brilliant logo here with the DEB forming a mirror image here to be the bug, debugging. So you can see the whole debugging, or you can simplify it down here to just the iconic portion of the logo. Just brilliant there. Wild Ventures, just beautiful mark here. Super simple and yet so elegant, and it has this kind of earthiness to it. It's not super crisp, super clean, but yet is still simple and elegant, and has some nice texture to it. And the typography is also always appropriate that he's doing. So it's got Wild Ventures here, and it's not exactly super organized and super clean, and it's it got a little bit of randomness to it and a little bit of kind of grit to it that kind of feels wild. Doesn't feel, but without being like too overly done. So reduces well. Furniture Taxi, another one. When you look at some of these and you look at a logo and you're like, when you think to yourself, of course, like that's such a brilliant idea. You can often look at a great idea and say, yeah, that's awesome. But coming up with that, it might seem so simple. Some of these things, like for example, the Nutriversity thing or the debugging, like you look at it and you're like, oh, that's so genius. Like Pajama Nation, for example, like, yeah, it's a flag with pajamas flying. But the question is, would you have come up with that idea? And often coming up with these ideas, this is where people need to have kind of a creative mind and let their mind wander and think of all sorts of interesting things. And for logos in particular, I know that coming up with these super simple but yet elegant and appropriate ideas is challenging. It's some people look at logos and they're like, oh, it's such a simple thing. Oh, how long can that take? It can actually take a long time to come up with that brilliant idea, because it's easy to look at it and say, oh yeah, of course, like that's great. But it's a whole other thing to be able to come up with that idea yourself. So just a bunch of wonderful logos here. So great example of some logo design. Here's another. We'll do one more here. So AutoWiz, for example. It's iconic, it's simple, but also an interesting little thing that some people might not notice is that the Auto Whiz, so A and W, so there's kind of like an A idea here with the triangle of his head, and then there's the W here. So you kind of get like an A and a W kind of built in. So it's like he started with the letter forms and turned them into a face, and it's iconic, it's unique. It reduces down well, which is important in a logo. You don't want something that's too complex that you can't understand when it's small. Logos are meant to be able to be small, and you want it to be memorable and brand appropriate. So beautiful example there. All right, book design. I used to work in a design studio that did a lot of books. And we did other things as well, but a lot of what we did was books. And if I told somebody that I'm working on a book, they'd say, "Oh, you're working on the cover," and I'd say, "Well, that's one part of it, but then there's also the like hundreds of pages that come in between." So book design, there's a lot of work to be done in a book design. It's not the most lucrative career. It's not a high-paying industry. Especially for the amount of work that you do in creating a book, because you think about every single one of these pages has to be laid out. And some books are simple. Some books are more complex depending on the layout of it. But I worked on Jansen's History of Art. We did a redesign of, forget which edition it was. It was multiple editions ago. And actually we ended up winning second place in the New York Book Show, which was a great honor. And the design studio that I was working at, where I got the honor of being able to work on this project, it took us, we spread that project out over a year. So it was a year that we were working on that. So we were not working on every single day of the entire year. Of course, there were other projects that were going on. There'd be approval times and stuff, but there was a lot of work and making it, because Jansen's History of Art is a 1,000-page art history book. So there was 1,000 pages to lay out. So that just takes a while. And so another example of design. Digital design, such as social media graphics. Somebody has to design these that companies are posting. And in this case, this company, they're creating social media graphics to bring awareness to certain topics. And so they create these social media graphics. They let people either download them or share them directly. The idea being that they want people to share it with their friends and family and people that they know, or whatever social network they're on, as a way to promote these messages. So they're creating messages and letting people share them. But it could be a company hires you to say, okay, we want to be talking about these issues, we want to be promoting these products, and we need graphics for our social media to advertise those, or to say whatever they want to communicate. And so the color, the typography, the layout, choosing the photos, all of that needs to be thought of and designed when designing those social media graphics. PowerPoint. It's a thing that not everybody thinks about. And I think in part because there's a lot of people that just fire up PowerPoint and just use one of the built-in profile, like the built-in themes. But there is a lot of custom design that can be done in PowerPoint if you choose to do it. So PowerPoint, yeah, it has a bunch of pre-made templates, but like you look at a presentation like this, none of this looks like PowerPoint. This is all custom designed. The typeface was chosen. It's not one of the default typefaces within your computer. The graphics were custom made graphics. So when you custom design everything in a presentation, it looks like a unique presentation. So presentation design is a thing. It's more of a niche market, but there's a lot of businesses that need presentations made. And a lot of people in those businesses are not the best designers. They might know the content that's supposed to be put into the presentation, but they don't know how to make it look good. So I know people that have just exclusively done presentation design. I know a woman who's been doing presentation design for, I think, 20 or 30 years. That's all she does for a living, is just presentation design. So a lot of graphic designers tend to not like presentation design. They don't like PowerPoint in particular. They tend to like Adobe software more. And so a lot of designers just say, I don't want to learn PowerPoint. And so it's just something they don't learn. So it's more of a niche area, but that's because a lot of designers just don't want to learn it. So if you're willing to learn PowerPoint, and to be honest, PowerPoint is a very powerful program. You can actually do a lot more with it than you may think it can do. If you've just been using the built-in things, you might be surprised at what its capabilities are. So that might be a more of a niche area if it's something you're interested in. And I didn't find a great example of an animated presentation, but some presentations are amazingly animated, and so that's another area of design that's, instead of just being static picture after picture, it could be something that involves animation and even sound as part of that presentation. So it's maybe an area that most designers don't think about, but maybe that's a niche that you could get into if that's something that's interesting to you. So as far as typical apps, Adobe apps are typically the apps that most designers are going to use. So they're going to use things like Adobe Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. I'll come back to those in just a second. As I said with PowerPoint, that's definitely more niche. Your average designer does not know PowerPoint because they normally don't like Office products and they don't get into that. Also, PowerPoint is a bit better on Windows than it is on the Mac, and most designers end up using a Mac. So the Mac version of PowerPoint is quite capable, just not as capable as the Windows version of it. So most designers are using Adobe apps, things like Adobe Photoshop for doing retouching and general graphics. So Photoshop can create graphics in addition to retouching. So yes, you can open up your images, your photographs, and color correct them and retouch them. And there's a lot of Photoshop work done that way. But Photoshop's also used a lot for all types of graphics. These could be web graphics, social media, all different types of graphic design, graphics for print, all different media. It can be creating designs that you're then going to take into Adobe After Effects to animate. Take it into Premiere and use it in Premiere to do when you're doing some video editing. You might bring in an image. InDesign is for doing page layouts, primarily print design layout for the most part. It can also create amazing PDFs as well. It has really good PDF authoring tools. So if you do need to publish things as PDFs, it's also very good at that, but primarily focused on the print area. So if you're laying out books and magazines and multi-page print documents, InDesign is the place. It can do single pages, things like posters and a business card or something like that, but print-oriented page layout. So if you're bringing images and text and things together, and especially dealing with one or more pages, InDesign is the place to do that. Illustrator is for drawing. So if you're creating, and it's a vector drawing tool. So vectors are nice because they are crisp and clean at any size you make them. Unlike pixel-based graphics like you have in Photoshop, which are limited. When you take a digital camera picture, for example, you're limited as far as the resolution you capture. So the final print size is determined by your hardware when you take a picture on your camera, or if you scan something into your scanner. But with Illustrator, you're working with vector graphics, and vector graphics, they can be enlarged or shrunk to any size and you never lose quality. So that's why things like logos and icons are typically drawn in Illustrator. So it is a drawing tool, but it also can be used for general graphics. It can be used to create social media graphics, a graphic that you take into After Effects and animate. Packaging designers and fashion designers often use it because it has good patterning tools for fashion designers, and it also has a lot of precision, so you can do precise work for packaging as well. And they might also be doing patterns for the packaging, so it's used in those areas as well. So for the most part, the Adobe Creative Cloud is what graphic designers use. And so as far as learning graphic design, we do actually have a graphic design certificate. If you're interested in learning graphic design with us, I'm going to be going over some different areas, but just in terms of like what we consider traditional graphic design. So let's say, for example, I go here to the syllabus here. So in here, we teach things like Adobe InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator, where you're learning how to use the apps. But then what about the design concepts? What about what makes good design? So typography, color, composition, those types of things, those we cover in the graphic design bootcamp, where you're working on projects of your own so that you can try to improve your design skills and become a better designer. So first you have to learn the tools so you know how to build your designs, but then you need to try to become a better designer and learn what makes good design. So that's kind of your traditional graphic design. But there are different areas of graphic design. There's things like user interface and web design. So let's talk about that. So user interface, UI is user interface. It's the visual side of a digital product. So this typically apps and websites is typically what you're talking about. But any digital thing that has an interface that you as a user are going to work with. So you're going to be designing things like the layouts, the typography, the color, the composition, anything that you see in a user interface, which could be an application or a website, something like that. These are things where people call it different stuff. So UI design, visual design, they're to a lot of people, these could be exactly the same things. I think visual design could be a little bit more inclusive of kind of any kind of digital design these days. This is kind of like the digital design version of graphic design. But you could see people calling it UI design or visual design. One thing that makes user interface design or web design different from a static thing like print is that you have things about user interaction and animation. So you've got this time element and this interactive element of, well, maybe I don't have to show everything to everybody right away. I could hide it behind a tab. I could make a button where I could open up a section and then I reveal some more information. If you're dealing with something like print, you've got a physical sheet of paper and you got to fit everything on that sheet of paper and make it look good and try to create a visual hierarchy when you have to see everything. It's different when you can hide things that you don't want people to see right away. And based on them interacting with the app, with the website, that they can click on something or tap on something, and then they can reveal something else. That interaction, things like games, interaction, that's a whole different thing to think about compared to a static medium like print, or like with presentations, is not as interactive typically with a presentation. And then there's the animation side of things, which presentations can include animation, websites, apps, all these things have an animation side of things. And that's a whole different dimension to think about because you got time. So if you're used to thinking about like the horizontal and the vertical and just thinking about a flat layout, think about how things move and how they animate and what's gonna catch your eye. It's all like a whole new dimension. It's like, oh, I was in a 2D world and now I'm in a 3D world. So a lot of times when designers switch from something like print to digital environments that include animation, it's a new thing for them to think about and get used to. But more and more things like video are being incorporated, animation is being incorporated. So it is an important area to start to become familiar with. So I know that you've all browsed websites, but I just wanted to pick out just a few nice looking examples that I could talk about here. So just because you've been on websites doesn't mean you've seen some nice examples of them. For example, here, notice the animation. I know it's subtle, but the colors are changing as we're looking through this. With the Stripe branding that they have, the Stripe logo itself actually has a diagonal line through it. So the bottom of the P has a diagonal line, the I is a diagonal line, and the top of the T has a diagonal line. So Stripe has this diagonal built into its kind of branding. And so that's why this slash, this diagonal is there. And they won't use it every single time because if you overdo something too much, you'll get tired of it. But every once in a while, they'll introduce that slash again here just to continue their branding. And so they'll incorporate some color areas here, again on that diagonal. So they incorporate animations. And in this case, it's an interactive animation, which is cool. So you can actually go in there and move the globe around and play around with it. So that's actually a fun animation. And then little animations that every once in a while play. They don't play all the time because they don't want things just flashing all the time because that would be too distracting for you to actually read what's on the page. So you got to be careful with animations. Too much and it's distracting. And then maybe a completely static page and maybe it's a little bit boring. Not saying that everything has to be animated, but what you're animating is just as important as how you're animating it. And they have a lot of pages on their site where they have animation. Even their menus have a little bit of animation that it kind of slides, like it kind of three-dimensionally like flips towards you, and then it animates between them. But when you first open the menu, it kind of animates towards you, like a 3D flip, which is fun. And you can go check out other ones. And so they animate things in. So yeah, cool examples of animation. So beautiful website. Stripe has a bunch of great designers on their team, and also technologically, it's a great website too. So it's worth checking out. Optimo, completely different kind of site. Very simple site, very elegant in its design. This is a high-end hat maker. And when you look through here, it's just a basic grid, but I like some of the very basic subtle things that they've done. When I hover over a hat, the text moves down, but if you look at the hat tips itself just a little bit. And if you think about what a gentleman would do with their hat, they would look at you, and when they greet you, they would pick up their hat with their one hand and they would tip it towards you. You tip the hat in recognition of someone. So they're kind of tipping their hat forward as a little recognition towards you. So nice little hover there. And then when I click on it, it goes to another page and the hat flies in. Gives a little bit of liveliness to it. And it's just a very elegant thing with it flying in. It's got a little subtle 3D shadow here, not too much, but just enough to make it look like it's in a physical 3D space almost, because it's got that like realistic shadow. And as it comes in, the shadow moves in with it and then actually gets closer to the shadow as it kind of sits in, but it's like it's floating here on screen. And all this is really just a basic slideshow, but that extra little bit of a fly in just makes this a little bit more unique and a little bit more memorable. Because we've all seen a slideshow before, and most of the time it just goes from photo to photo, and maybe the whole photo slides over, but this it moves in and it sits down, and it's just not just a photo sliding in. There's a more liveliness to it, a little bit more like real life. And these are expensive hats. This is like a $1,250 hat. I have no idea how I found this website. I was not in the market for a $1,200 hat. But just a beautiful site, and so elegant, so clean. And when you think about making your design stand out, you can sometimes take something very simple, but just give it a little bit of a different twist to make it unique. I remember years ago I was watching a video of a logo designer talking, and he was describing his logo process and saying to people that when you first get started designing a logo, you might think to throw in all sorts of different tricks, and you're trying to do a lot in a logo. But logos are supposed to be super simple and very core, kind of boiling it down to just its core essence. And he said you should just find one visual trick, like just one thing that is an interesting little different thing, just something to catch your eye. One little visual trick is all you need. And if you put too many visual tricks in there, they all just kind of dilute down. And so it's better just to have one. And so in here, just one little visual trick, right? And it's actually the same thing as the hats page, that it kind of tips forward. But it's one little thing to set this website apart, to make it a little bit more interesting and out of the ordinary. I've never seen a website exactly like this, even though I've seen a slideshow 1,000 times. So sometimes all you need is just one little thing to be different, and you'll be memorable because of that. Now, Harvard Law Review. Before I click on this, just imagine in your mind what Harvard Law Review might be. You might be thinking, it's law, it's boring, how great can this be? It's a beautiful website, but before I go there, let's just think about it. Harvard Law Review, it is the law. The law is written, so it's probably a lot of written word. And so if you're going to do a beautiful looking website that's about the written word, typography is going to be very important, right? So let's go to it here. And so, right off the bat, beautiful typography, but also they wanted to bring a little bit of color, a little bit of life into this. So they have some interesting backgrounds. Whenever I click onto one of these articles, there's a different background. So there's some color that integrates with that background, and that keeps it interesting, right? So it's not that every single one has a different color and a different background. So, does this particular background mean anything? No, it's just a way to add some color and some brightness and some cheeriness to what otherwise might be, for some people, a boring topic. For other people, they might love reading the law, but it keeps it visually interesting. You don't have to be plain boring with your design. You can be bright and vibrant, and yet they still were careful about the type design, because this is mainly type oriented. So they made a choice of a beautiful typeface. They chose a set of different typefaces that work really well together. So they have things like a beautiful italic here, and they have different types of information designed very nicely. So their kind of category heading here, their main title, who it's by. Each of these has a different look, but they all go very well with each other. The small type is very legible, so you can read it easily. And when it comes to, let me just hit the refresh button here for a second just to clean this up. This looks like it's actually, go up back to this other page here. Yeah, okay, this one's displaying properly. Here we go. So here's this article that you're reading, and they do even nice little references. And instead of doing footnotes where you have to go all the way to the bottom, you can look out here to the side and read those. And sometimes there's a lot in that little reference that needs to be written. So you can click on the show more and you can read more. But they didn't want to overwhelm it, but with too much information, so they hid those so they're not too overwhelming. They're right there. They're useful if you need them, but otherwise let's hide them to some extent and not show you all of it, because some of them can get quite long. It's not too wide of a column of text, so it's easy to read. Probably could be a little bit wider, but you don't want text that's too wide, because then it becomes hard to read. And it's a nice size, so you don't have to squint at the text, and just a beautiful type design. And then down here at the bottom, nice space, airy design. Things aren't crammed too close together, feeling tight and claustrophobic. And you can go read into the next article, go back to the previous one, and just nice little designs here of these various elements. Just a beautiful website here. So there you go. As far as app design goes, with apps, there's no limit to what you can kind of do with an app. There's a technological limit, but user interface wise, there are some trends for sure. But you kind of can do a lot of stuff with apps because you don't have to look like your standard iOS app or your standard Android app. So you get a lot of variety of what you can do. You can do something that's very appropriate for what you're doing, and you don't have to look like a certain platform. And unlike websites where I'd say there's kind of more norms with apps. Each app, if it's very task specific, you can kind of come up with your own new interface that's very appropriate for that specific kind of app. Like I said, there are some kind of norms. For example, things like tab bars that are often across the bottom for different areas are common across many apps, but you don't necessarily have to fit within that if your app doesn't work for that concept. You can incorporate animation. You could do interactions like swiping, use your GPS. There's all sorts of things that can be interestingly done. Like here's a cool swipe and swipe animation and various opening and closing animations. It's pretty fun. Yeah, so all sorts of cool things you can do in an app, and actually a lot of this can be done on websites these days. But I feel like, especially in app design, I feel like people are a little bit more creative sometimes in app design. Not necessarily that they can't do that on the web, they just don't do it as much. And knowing that you're on a mobile phone, you kind of know that people can do things like swiping and stuff, whereas on the desktop, if you're with a mouse, you're not going to have that swiping ability. You're going to be using your mouse. So it's a bit of a different thing. So they each have their own kind of norms within industries, but I feel like apps can go a little beyond the norm sometimes, and you can create custom interfaces that just make sense specifically for apps. So as far as creating your designs for user interfaces, for apps, for websites, there's a variety of software that you can use. Sketch is a Mac-only design app, and Adobe XD is their equivalent of that. So these are just two different companies that do similar things. There's also another app called Figma that's also used as well, but from my experience, I'm seeing more people using Sketch and Adobe XD right now. Sketch is a Mac only app, whereas Adobe XD is cross-platform, so that works on Mac and PC. Basically the same thing. They both do the same thing. They're both for laying out digital experiences, digital designs. So whether you're a user interface designer or a UX designer, UX designers aren't so concerned about how something looks as much as they are concerned about how something works. A UX or user experience designer wants to make sure that the flow of an experience is good, the way they start and do something and then end. Can you get your task accomplished? Are you enjoying the process? Is it easy to do? Is it efficient to do? Testing it on users. So user experiences design is kind of a different type of design, but Sketch and Adobe XD are used for UX and UI design. So websites, apps, or really any sort of digital product. It had been that Photoshop had been used a lot for web design and still is used for web design, but more and more people, as time goes on, are switching to Adobe XD and Sketch because these are modern web design tools. People were using Photoshop because so many designers know Photoshop. It's hard to be a designer and not know Photoshop for at least doing photo retouching and color correction, because most of the time you're going to have some imagery that either needs to be created or needs to be edited. So designers turned to what they knew, and they knew Photoshop, but it wasn't ideally meant for web design. It was called Photoshop, not Design Shop. So it was meant for photography first and foremost, and then they added different design tools. But they kind of hit a wall and said, hey, we really need a separate app for doing digital design. And so let's create Adobe XD in the case of Adobe, and Sketch is a different company. But as an app designer, as a UI designer, web designer, I still will use Photoshop to create web graphics, maybe for social media and stuff, and also for doing photo editing and general graphics. It's useful for that because my websites, my apps, they're going to have photos and they're going to need retouching. So I'm still going to use Photoshop for that, even if I'm laying out my website, my app, my email, whatever it is I'm designing in Sketch or Adobe XD. I'm still going to need to incorporate some graphics or some photos from Photoshop. Adobe Illustrator can draw icons, logos, things that I can use in my layouts in Adobe XD and Sketch, so still useful to know. And then there is the potential of needing to do some coding. So in particular with websites, there's HTML, CSS coding that you may be doing. Not exactly the design side necessarily, unless you're taking an existing website and redesigning it using some of the code, making some design tweaks. But the more you know about code, the more you understand how websites work. So web designers, a lot of them do know design as well as some coding. So having a code editor like Sublime Text or Visual Studio Code or Atom, these are the three, I would say, most popular code editors out there, might be something. Not so much of a design app necessarily because it's coding, but it might be useful when you're, like, let's say, redesigning somebody's site and you just want to go in and make a couple tweaks to the code that had been made to update the design. So code editors could potentially be useful there. Which brings us to, should you learn code if you're getting into web design? If you're getting into app design, I would say you don't need to, because app design, the code is much harder for apps. So it's a much higher level coding, it's less intuitive. And so if you're going to become an app coder, you're probably going to make the most money you can just coding apps. So if you're going to take the time and become a good app coder, you'd probably just want to become an app coder and just do that, focus on that, not do design and coding apps. I don't know that I've ever seen a designer that also codes like iOS apps or Android apps. It's typically there'll be a designer and a separate developer doing the coding. Now with websites, website coding is easier than app coding. So I think website coding is something that designers can learn about and at least be somewhat familiar with, potentially even to be able to do a bunch of coding. So I think that web coding skills are very useful for designers. That doesn't mean you have to be the sole coder, that you have to do all the coding. Our websites work through code. That's what drives the functionality. The more you understand how that code works, the better you understand how the web works. And as a designer designing in that medium, I think it can help you to understand. In the case of an app, pretty much if you can imagine it working, it's going to work. And the web used to be a lot more limited than it is today. So it used to be especially important to understand that because the web couldn't do certain things technologically, you couldn't design for those experiences. Now today, the web is much more capable. We can do a lot of things we could never dream about 10 years ago. For the most part, if you can imagine it, you probably can do it in a website. Now, some things are going to be harder to do than others, but it is definitely much more capable than it was years ago. So, but I do think it helps you to understand how the web works by understanding coding. Also, designers are going to need to give their designs over to developers or coders if it's going to be a separate person, and it's going to help you to better communicate to them to make sure that they can execute and build your design the way that you designed it. Also, because you start to learn the code, you kind of know what's possible. And so if you know what can be done, what should be done, that's good, because then you know, oh, I know I can do this. So when I design it, I know my developer will be able to do it. They're not going to kick it back to me and say, oh, I can't do this, and say, well, just redesign this whole thing. Because you don't want to design an experience that can't be built. You want to make sure you design something that can be built by a developer. Also, it lets you know as a designer how easy or hard it is to do something, because you may not have the time to do something difficult, because maybe your developer is capable, but it's going to take them a long time, or maybe it's going to cost a lot because it's going to take a long time. So if you know that, oh, well, I could do it the hard way, or I could do it the easy way, because you know some of what's involved with the code and how hard it is, then you could maybe choose the easy way for now and then say, well, when we have time, we'll come back later and do this more difficult thing, which I really like, but we don't have the time or the budget for it right now. So it helps you to understand what can be done and timelines better. So I think it's useful to at least become familiar with code, if not actually learn it well enough that you can actually do some coding. So web animation, very related to web design. And technically there's app animation and web animation. So, but for app animation right now, as far as technologies that are used, because we were just talking about coding. So coding is a technology that lets us build a website. How would we technically build web animations? They could be an animated GIF. Animated GIFs, I'll have an example in just a moment, but basically it's an animated image. They're meant to be very simple. The file sizes can get really big quickly, so they're meant to be kind of short, simple, quick animations. They're not meant to be feature films. They're not meant to be long things. They have worked for this is the oldest way to animate on the web, and so they've been around for just decades and decades. Let's say the original way to animate. And so in HTML email, so when you get beautiful looking emails that have animations in them, they're typically done with animated GIFs because they've been around for so long, they actually work. Email itself, we can't do all the latest and greatest stuff we can do on a web page in an email, because the email clients, the email apps that we're in, often are less capable than the web browsers that we're viewing our websites in. So even though we use the same HTML and CSS languages that we use in a web page, we use them in email, we have to do some different things. And so animated GIFs, they work even in emails. So that's how a lot of email animation is done. So you can animate in Photoshop to create animated GIFs. There are multiple tools to create animated GIFs, but if you want to design your own custom animations, animated GIFs in Photoshop is the way to go. So Photoshop is great for creating your more simple, basic animated GIFs. If you want to create something more complex, Adobe After Effects, that is animation and effects for video, and those can be turned into animated GIFs as well. So it's way overkill for just a simple animated GIF. Photoshop is much more suited for that. But if you want to create some crazy cool, complex animation, either for video or animated GIFs, After Effects is the way to go. JavaScript is for interactive animation, interaction and animation. And so, for example, like when I click on this and let's see. Yeah, so like how it slides up and down between these sections, JavaScript is doing the sliding. When I click on something and it slides open and animates the arrow, that's JavaScript based on my user interaction. So based on me doing something, it's doing something on the page and animating the page. So that would be an example of JavaScript. Now, the core language that browsers use is JavaScript. jQuery and GreenSock are two libraries. They're things that you can use where it's pre-written JavaScript that you can use to make your life easier, so you don't have to write the plain JavaScript yourself. jQuery is kind of like the Swiss Army knife of libraries. It does a lot of things. Animation is one of the many things it does, but it does a ton of other things. It does some animation, but that's not its focus. So if you purely want to animate that's the goal of what you want to do on the web, GreenSock is the way to go. GreenSock, you can do all sorts of really cool animations and animate all sorts of different things within a web page. And so GreenSock's JavaScript library focuses solely on animation. Been around for a long time, and really cool way to animate things with JavaScript. And then CSS, so every web page is made of HTML, which labels the content, and then CSS, which styles that content. And technically we can do CSS animation for simple little animations, like when you hover over something, maybe it gets bigger, maybe it moves down a little bit. For basic animations, CSS can do it. And you can technically build up more complex ones, but it's not as good as something like JavaScript, in particular GreenSock. When you want to do more complex animations, GreenSock is going to be way more powerful, way easier to do complex stuff than CSS. But CSS is fine for just a simple little animation. So here's some examples. This is your kind of basic frame by frame style animation that you build in Photoshop. So you show one picture, you show another picture, you show another picture. If you've ever seen, or if you've ever built a flipbook when you were a kid, where you take a stack of papers and you draw a circle on one piece of paper, and then you go to the next and you draw another circle a little bit further down, you go to the next, you draw another circle a little bit down, and then you flip through it and you create like a bouncing ball. that's kind of the style of animation with animated GIFs. It's picture after picture, like page after page of animation. Now, it could just be showing different static pictures like this, or if you put them into sequence and you switch between them very, very quickly, you can create animated GIFs like this. Now, this is the same fundamental idea. You're seeing picture, 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 but there's tons of stuff moving in this image. So Photoshop is good at creating simple things like this. After Effects would be way more than you need to create a simple animated GIF. After Effects would be overkill. But on the other hand, if you want to create something complex like this, this would be basically impossible to do with Photoshop. Or if you could do it, it'd be an incredible amount of work and it'd be hard to edit. But After Effects would make something like this much more easy to do. Not necessarily saying this would be easy to do, but it would be easier in After Effects than it would be in Photoshop. And so if you want to create more complex, interesting animations, After Effects is the way to go. But Photoshop is great for the simple things that you need to just create quickly. So it depends on the style of animated GIF that you want to create. As far as green sock animations go, these can be really complex, interactive animations. They can also be very simple too. You can do anything in between. And this one takes a little bit because it's loading a bunch of animations and sound effects as well. So that's why it took a little bit longer to load. That's not GreenSock's fault. That's just because they're loading a ton of stuff. So in this case, I can move around. There's some sound effects. It's pretty cool. So very smooth. The frame rates on this are super high, very smooth animation. I can click on one, loads an animation here. And if you ever played Fruit Ninja where you swipe over things, do a little Fruit Ninja style here. Close it up. So fun little animated transitions between these things, and then they load interesting animations. Close it up. So yeah, just interactive, fun animations here. There you go. So one example that's cool. Cognito here. Sequential timed animations where things are happening one after the other, so timing is important. That's where something like GreenSock is much easier to deal with that than, let's say, CSS. CSS is kind of hard to sequence a bunch of animation things, one thing happening after another. So down below here, here for example, multiple things happening. So we got things moving, more things moving. So they don't animate everything, but they do animate some. And so you always want to be careful about what's the balance of animation. How much are you doing? But in this case, they're using something like GreenSock to do the animation. So as far as learning web design, we do have a variety of certificates. These are just some of the certificates that we offer. We offer a web design certificate. In our web design certificate, if you look at the syllabus for this, we teach how to code websites with HTML, CSS. So the web development, Flexbox, JavaScript, jQuery, these are our coding classes, but then we also teach Sketch. So Sketch is so you can design and lay out your designs that you will then code. If you are on PC, you can actually swap out the Sketch Bootcamp for Adobe XD if you prefer to use Adobe XD instead of Sketch, because Sketch is a Mac-only app, so we let you swap those out. And then we also teach coding HTML, email as well. So this is mostly coding focused, but you do get to learn Sketch as a design app so that you can plan out your designs that you're going to build with code. So focuses mostly on coding with some design in there. And then the visual design, this certificate here, this focuses on more the design side of things. In here, we don't have any coding classes. So we have things like Photoshop, Illustrator, fundamental things that every designer should know. Because you're going to retouch images. You're going to create graphics for social media, you're going to create icons, logos. So fundamental, every designer really needs to know Photoshop and Illustrator. And then Adobe XD and Sketch, because right now in the industry, Adobe XD and Sketch are competing programs. And so if you go to one company, they might be using Sketch. If you go to another one, they might be using Adobe XD. Once you learn one, The other one's easier to learn, but they do have their own unique things for each app, so they do work a little bit differently to some extent. So even though they are competing apps, we teach both of them because in the market, if you're going out there to look for a job, you might have some companies using one or the other. And if you're doing freelance work and you're working for one company, they might be using Adobe XD. You do freelance for another company, they might be using Sketch. And you can't just say, well, I only use this one. You got to go with what that company is using. So that's why we teach both, so that people will become more marketable. And then the graphic design bootcamp goes into fundamental design concepts, typography, color, composition in a general sense. So things like logo design. There can also be some print in there as well, some digital design. So we do a variety of different mediums, and it's kind of fundamental graphic design. And then the visual design it's a web design bootcamp where you're actually focusing on what makes good looking websites. So once you know the design apps, then how can you make a good looking website? That's what the visual design focuses on. So that's really the web side of design. And so we've got kind of the coding side, the design side, and then if you want both user experience and user interface, so you want to know how something can work well and look good, you can do the UX and UI. Now, as far as computers go, I did mention that designers primarily use Macs. So we're going to talk about computers here for just a moment. For the most part, any decent Mac or PC will work for the most part. It used to be many years ago that you had to buy a Mac because the design software didn't work on Windows, but nowadays most software works on both. It also used to be that you had to buy a very high-end expensive computer, but for the most part, any decent computer will work. I say decent, like if you buy the cheapest Windows laptop, like $100 laptop or something, $200 laptop, that's not going to work the greatest. But if it's a decent Mac or PC, it should work for the most part for any of the software. Now, most designers do use Macs. It used to be that you had to use a Mac because the software wasn't written for Windows. For example, it used to be that PowerPoint was a Mac-only app before Microsoft purchased it. And so today, still, some apps like Sketch, if you're doing Apple's Final Cut Pro for video editing, some of those work only on a Mac. But for the most part, most things work on Mac and PC. But most designers still choose to use a Mac. I do think that Macs have they are a little nicer for doing design, but for the most part, most of the software works cross-platform. So like all the Adobe stuff works cross-platform. So if you want to work on Windows, you can, but just know that most designers use Macs for most of the design industry. There are exceptions though. So PCs can run most design apps, and there are sometimes when they are better. For example, PowerPoint. Even though Microsoft purchased PowerPoint as a Mac-only app and then made it available for PC, today the PowerPoint is better on Windows. It just is. And the Mac version of PowerPoint is decent. It's actually gotten quite good over the past couple of years. They've been adding a bunch of features, but still isn't quite as capable as the Windows version of it. Other things like AutoCAD, for example, the AutoCAD for Mac sucks. You should just use it on Windows. So for the most part, if you want to be on Mac or PC, you can choose whatever you want, but designers do tend to use Macs more than Windows. If you're buying a new computer, make sure that inside is an SSD, not a hard drive. So a hard drive is the spinning hard drive, like the old traditional hard drive, and they are massively slow compared to SSD. So SSDs are solid state drives. For the most part, most laptops these days are all SSD drives. They don't typically put a hard drive, like a spinning platter-based hard drive, in most laptops these days. But if you're getting a desktop, you might be still getting something with a hard drive, especially if it's a cheaper computer. And the hard drives are just so much slower than an SSD. The advantage of hard drive is that they're cheap. They're cheap, but they're slow. SSDs are expensive. They're fast, but they're expensive. So when it comes to storage, if you want let's say a 2 terabyte drive, a hard drive, 2 terabytes, super cheap. 2 terabytes of SSD, much more expensive. So that's the downside to it. It is a lot faster, but it's more expensive. So if you're buying laptops, for the most part, they're mostly SSD. So you probably don't have to worry so much about hard drives. But if you're looking at desktops, if you're getting a Mac, like let's say an iMac or something, I don't think that they have too many with a regular hard drive anymore. Maybe they've phased them all out, but they might have something called a fusion drive. The fusion drive is kind of a hybrid between the two. What they'll do is they'll take an SSD for speed and they'll fuse it together with a hard drive, which is cheap for lots of storage. So you get one drive that is fused together. So they take some SSD, some hard drive, fuse it into one hard drive. So that's what you see. And so you get the speed of the SSD and the size of the cheap hard drive for an affordable price. And so if you weren't getting full SSD, which is really expensive to get big drives, at least get a fusion drive. And that is a Mac only thing though. They don't have that equivalent for Windows. So Windows, you have to get full SSD and spend more money. Just don't get a plain old hard drive for your internal drive for the computer. It's just so much slower. When it comes to the monitors that you're looking at, you can buy cheap low res displays. So you can buy like an HD display, but an HD display is not a high res display. High res displays are things like 4K monitors. Apple calls them Retina displays, but everybody else just calls them typically high-res displays or 4K. Same equivalent happens on Windows. Like Windows can get 4K monitors. They don't call them Retina displays, but they're still high-res. Your laptop that you get, make sure it has a high-res display, what Apple calls a Retina display. I think nowadays Apple has switched everything over to Retina or high-res these days. I don't think they still sell anything. It's possible though that maybe like the lowest end, like I don't know, the lowest end iMac or something is still like a non-Retina display. So just make sure you get a high-res display, because especially if you're designing websites, user interfaces, you are limited by the display that you have. And so if you have a low-res display, you can't see what it's like to have a high-res display. It's like designing on a black and white monitor. You can have color images open, but they're going to display in black and white. You can't see the color because you don't have a display capable. If you do not have a high-res display, you can't see what a high-res display looks like. So spend the extra money and get a 4K monitor. If you have an older computer, just keep in mind that your graphics card might not be capable of running a 4K monitor. So if you're going to buy something like a 4K monitor, make sure that your computer is capable of driving it, that it can actually display it as 4K. Just a couple things to keep in mind. Oh, and also one other thing that's not listed here. If you're getting into things like video editing and you're going to be doing more motion graphics, you need a better computer. So spend the extra money on a better computer if you're getting into video. Now, I know we didn't really talk about video tonight, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So, but if it's just kind of a standard graphics app, non-video app, then you can get a little bit of a lower end computer. If you can afford it and get a little bit better one, of course, that's going to help, especially when it comes to things like video cards. If you can get one that has like a dedicated specialized video card as opposed to just the integrated graphics, that's definitely going to help you out and make you a better, give you a better computer. So portfolios. So let's say you've learned your design apps for whatever area of design you want to get into. You are learning the apps, you're learning the concepts that make good design. You start to practice doing designs using those apps, and you start to create projects. You want to build a portfolio of work to show people that you can do this. So let's take a look at some portfolio websites. I chose a lot of different kinds of designers and different experiences to show you the variety of portfolios that are out there. So in this case, when you think about what a portfolio is meant to do, it's meant to show your work. And so even if I don't click on anything in here, there's nice, big, beautiful examples of their work. And I don't even have to click on any one of these, just already see that they've got nice work. Now, if I do go into one, I can click on it. Nice, beautiful examples. So he did this. The client is personal, so that means this is just his own concept. He did this himself. Doesn't mean it's any less. It just means he did this for himself rather than for a client. He did some computer-generated graphics, so 3D stuff. So this is a 3D design that he created just for himself. And it doesn't matter whether a client's paying the bill or not. Good design is good design, right? And so if you're trying to show your capabilities, when you're first getting started, you're not necessarily going to have paid clients, giving you work and then you doing good work that you can put into your portfolio. So how do you get started? You need to do some of your own personal projects. So it's okay to do your own personal concept projects. You could call it a concept. And let's say you're even working in the industry. Let's say you do an amazing design and the startup loses funding and they go belly up. And that was before it could launch. So it's still good design that you did. And it doesn't matter that the company went bankrupt before you got to launch it. You can still say, this is an example of the design that I did. So it doesn't matter whether it's like real design in the sense that like it was for a real client, or it doesn't matter if you made money off of it. What if you do pro bono work? I remember when I first got started in design, I was showing my portfolio around, and I put a piece in, and it was like my first real printed piece, and I wanted to show everybody that I had done it. When I was in college, actually, somebody came to the college and said, "Hey, I want to hire somebody to do some work." And of course, it was a cheap project. He was looking for cheap labor, so he got a student for cheap at the local college, and he got one color printing. He didn't pay for multiple colors, just went with the cheapest printing job. But yet I was so excited because I'm like, I got paid. Like, this is my real design. It's like my other stuff wasn't real, which was wrong, but mentally that's how I was thinking. So of course I put that in my portfolio, but it was not the best printing. It was as good as I could do given the constraints of the job, but it wasn't the best example of what I was capable of doing. And I remember showing that to somebody, and the woman, I think it was a woman that was reviewing my my portfolio. She said very nicely to me, she said, "Why is this piece in your portfolio?" And I explained to her why, and she said, it's the weakest thing in your portfolio. And I forget her exact words to me, but basically I got the idea that, like, okay, I know it was real, but it's not really good. Like, it wasn't a good example of what I was capable. And so she didn't care whether it was real or not. She only cared whether it was really good or not. And so I learned an important lesson from her, in that it's about showing quality. And it doesn't matter whether somebody paid the bills or not for it. Good design is good design. I remember many years ago, there was a student that did a final project and on his website, and it was like a video presentation of that one needs a password there. Let's go back. Some of this is password protected. Let's go to this one. This one's not. And it was a redesign of AmericanAirlines.com. And at the time, AmericanAirlines.com was horrible. And this guy made a video presentation of everything that he would do, and it was amazing. It was amazing video, amazing web design, and it was just a concept piece as like a final project for his college. And I thought to myself, wow, this is an amazing designer. It doesn't matter that he wasn't hired to do this. And it went viral. Lots of people were talking about it. And I don't think he had anything else in his portfolio. I think it was the only thing in his portfolio. And I would have hired him just from that one piece because it was good enough. Quality is more important than quantity. Especially when you're getting started, you're not going to have a lot of stuff. So focus on the quality of it, not the quantity of it in the beginning. One thing I like about this portfolio is at the end, you can come down here and you can see all the projects at the end. So it makes it easy to go into the next project. There's a lot of portfolios when I scroll down and I get to the bottom, there's like nothing to do at the bottom. And so I have to like hit the back button, figure out where I was. And so this just leads you right into the next thing, that you can choose whatever your next project is, which is nice. The usability of your portfolios is also important. You want to make it as easy as possible for people to see the work large and move through the work. So you cannot get simpler than this portfolio. Just picture after picture. It's a one-page portfolio. Everything is here, just as big as possible. No fancy anything, just picture, picture, picture. He doesn't even say anything. He doesn't even say words. Just picture after picture. Now, you look at this. Beautiful photography, beautiful design. He kind of doesn't need to say anything. And it's just great work. Now, let's go all the way to the bottom. And email, social, and there you go. So you could just see that he does a lot of different type of work, and it's just beautiful design.
And so I like this example because it's so simple in its execution. It's just one page with big examples. So you don't have to get super fancy with your portfolio. You want big examples where people can see your work. Now, going from very simple to very fancy, this one's animated, does transitions. Just to give an alternative to that, I can click on it to go into that and it loads it up. They show different examples on different devices, so you can see the website's a responsive website, so you can see that it works on mobile and tablet and desktop and looks good on all different size screens. They talk about what they did. So just to give another example of something you can do. Down here at the bottom, it says the role, the employer, the client, and you can go to the next project or the previous project. So again, easy to move into the next project. Just keep me moving through the portfolio. I say that and it sounds so simple. Like when somebody comes to your site, you want to encourage them to flow through the portfolio. But I can't tell you how many portfolios I've been on where I have to keep hitting back, and then I click on something and hit back and I click on something. It should be so simple that when you get to the bottom, you either can see all the projects or you should be able to go into the next or the previous. Like, lead me into the next thing. And let's take a look at one more. I wanted to end on another pretty simple one, just to show that you don't have to have a super complex portfolio, just big examples of work. That's what people want to see, is just nice big examples. And sometimes you can say things about your work in case people want to learn more about what you did on that project. And then at the end, at the bottom, lead me into some other projects so I can keep going. So building a portfolio. When you're building it, it's okay to start with a few projects, right? You're just getting started. Just leave room for more, like know that there's going to be some other stuff coming along. So you don't have to make it look like there's a hole for those, but just know that you're going to grow and you're going to add more things. So keep that in mind when you're designing your portfolio, that you're going to have more stuff coming. It's better to start with a few good projects than a lot of just not so good ones. Like I said before, when I was given that example, I took that piece out of my portfolio because it brought my portfolio down. If you show me 3 great pieces, I think you're 100% great. If you show me the same 3 great pieces, and then you add 3 not so great pieces, now you're only great half the time. So the other 3 pieces bring down the other ones, because now you're only 50% great instead of 100% great. So quality over quantity. It's okay to start with fictional, practice, concept, whatever you want to call these kind of projects that are just things you came up with, because if you can do good design, it doesn't matter whether it's fictitious or not. It's good design. Even for real projects, sometimes people can't do good design. So if you show me examples of good design, it's good design no matter what. So you're thinking like, well, okay, what do? I don't know what to do. I need to build a portfolio. What can I put in my portfolio? There's tons of ideas. Think about whatever is in your area that you want to be in, right? Whether it's app design, web design, and just look around at things that people are making. So it could be any business, right? Just think of business. They need social media graphics. They need a website. They need an email that a promotion they're going to email out to people, right? Just think of anything related to a business in your design area. You could redesign a website, their menu, their logo, whatever it is, their business card, anything that interests you, right? So maybe, for example, Jonas Schrogren, he went through our program and he built this website called boast.nyc, which is a great website. It's a great name, boast.nyc. But it's even better because it's the best of Astoria. So best of Astoria, Queens. So it's Boast, best of Astoria. So it works on 2 levels. It's great. And so he built this as a static HTML, CSS website, and then wanted to add a blog. So he came back and he learned WordPress, and he put some advertisements on the site as well, so he could start to make some money off the website. People vote and find out the best places to eat. So best American place, best Greek, for example. Where's Greek? There we go. I don't know if it's still true, but it used to be. I used to live in Astoria, Queens, actually. It was the second highest population of Greeks outside of Greece. They had amazing Greek food. And so I was sad to see some of those Greek places go out of business, like Uncle George's and stuff. It was like an institution in Astoria. But anyway, so bunch of great places. Astoria, Queens. It's a cool place. If you're in New York City, go check it out at some point. But yeah, so he built this website, and probably makes a little bit of money off of some of the advertisements. So it's a real thing that he was just interested in that he built. And then if you are interested in something and you build it, if somebody talks to you about it and says, "Oh, tell me something about it," you'll speak with more passion about that thing because you know it. Like, for example, one of my friends on Facebook, she is into knitting. So if she was getting into web design, I would say you should create a website about knitting because you really know a lot about knitting. You can probably share that information with people and it'll be useful to people. And so you never know how useful this website will be. Like, that could go out to a lot of people and help a lot of people. And you know a lot about knitting, so you'll be an authority and you'll be able to create a good knitting website. And so it gives you a goal and something you know about to build. As an example, there's this website called unsplash.com. And I'm not saying that a side website like this would ever become something like unsplash.com. But in the case of unsplash.com, this started out where some guys, some people behind a design studio, they had some leftover footage, some leftover photos. So they did a bunch of photo shoots and they had some leftover photos and they're like, hey, these are going unused. It's kind of sad that we took these nice pictures and nobody can use it. We don't have a use for it. So they made a website called unsplash.com and they put up those photos and they let people download them and do whatever they wanted. So it was like free, high quality, good images. And they only started with a few images. It wasn't very many. But then they got other people to contribute and more people contributed. And now it's a huge source of high quality, free imagery. So first of all, good to know that this unsplash.com exists for your design because you can use their images in your design. But also Unsplash 7 million. So they actually raised $7 million of venture capital because they're now becoming a business. And I think that, if I remember right, I think that unsplash.com, which was just a side website that a design studio created, is now bigger than the design studio that created it. So this little side website ended up becoming this big thing. So interesting to me as an entrepreneur kind of person. But the main point is, why are you building something? You're building it for your portfolio. If it's useful to other people, great. If it's something you're passionate about, you'll be willing to create it. You'll be more authoritative about it. So it could be anything you're interested in. And, like design an app, build a website, look at businesses, look at what they need, and then build things that are like what they need, like social media graphics, email promotions, websites, whatever it is. Because you want to make sure your portfolio shows things that employers are looking for. Or if you're trying to get client work, you're trying to show things that clients want. Oh, I need you to do a social media graphic. Oh, I see examples of social media graphics you've designed. So think of it from a business perspective. Businesses want to hire you to design things. What would they be hiring you to do? And so you think about business needs and you can design those types of things, put them in your portfolio. Focus on quality, not quantity in the beginning. So in wrapping up here, practice makes perfect. The more you design, the better you're going to get. You're going to get better at your design tools, your apps that you're using, and you're going to get better at the act of designing. What's going to make your design look better? The more you design, the better you're going to get at it. So learn your apps, learn your design concepts, keep practicing so that you get better. In the beginning, you'll probably sense like, hey, I'm not as good with the apps as I want to be. I'm not as good of a designer as I want to be. Just push through that and know that as you keep working, you're going to get better and better. And your ability will eventually catch up to your taste that you have. You want to close that gap. There's a video called The Gap by Ira Glass, I think it is, on YouTube, where he talks about that gap. And in the beginning, basically, your taste is better than your ability, and you need to keep working through so that you can improve your ability, so that your ability catches up to your taste. And so just work through that, keep practicing until you get better. And as you're doing it, try to have fun. Like, design is a cool thing. Like, I love what I do because for me, it's fun designing. I have a great satisfaction when I build something, when I animate something, when I design something cool. And in the end, I'm like, wow, I made that. Like, that's cool. To me, that's an exciting thing. So through Noble Desktop, of course, we have a variety of different programs if you want to learn with us. These can be done live online or when we have people doing in-person classes. You can do them in person as well. Depends on the particular class as to whether we're running that in person or not. You can check with anybody at Noble Desktop to see if we're running it in person or online. But from anywhere in the world, anybody can tune in. They are done live, so all of our classes are live streamed. They're not pre-recorded things. And so whether it's graphic design, web design, user interface design, UX design, we have a bunch of different programs where you can learn how to do this. We are based in New York City, so all of our classes are done on Eastern time, but anybody from anywhere in the world, as long as you can tune in during those times, can do our classes. Most of the classes that we're doing are done in a demonstration style, so that the teacher will demonstrate how to do something and then hands-on practice. So it's important for people to do work, and so our classes are demonstration and learning. So you'll see how things work, see how the apps work, see how design works, and then you will be doing hands-on part as well, because you need to become good at these apps. You need to become good at the design. And so it's we try to teach a lot in a short amount of time because we're concerned with wasting people's times. Like, we want to make sure that you can learn quickly and efficiently. So we try to teach you the most we can in an efficient way possible. So most of our classes that we have, they come with workbooks that are step-by-step workbooks that walk you through doing things. They're great for going through during the classes and great for follow-up later on. So in case you forget anything, you can go back over the material and practice those. And so I hope that you will at some point join us for a class. I would love to see you come back, and hope to see you in the future. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and I hope you have gotten something out of this, and that it'll help you to get started in your journey to becoming a graphic designer.